You want to know how a Tuesday morning can change the entire story of your life? Let me just say, you never really know your neighbors until someone in a power suit is screaming about executive privilege while getting hauled off in handcuffs, and suddenly your front yard feels like the season finale of some wild legal drama. Yeah, that happened. And believe me, I couldn't have made up half of what went down. So, picture this. I just rolled back into my hometown after 7 years away, running on nothing but stale coffee and the hope of a hot shower at my grandfather's house. The place I grew up, painted fences, fixed bikes, the whole Norman Rockwell deal. Instead, I get greeted by a woman with a clipboard and a BMW parked right across my driveway, looking like she was auditioning for Cops, HOA edition. Banner flapping in the breeze, HOA compliance checkpoint, like I'm trying to smuggle livestock instead of just park my truck. I roll down my window. Try to be polite, mistake number one, and I get this look like I just confessed to robbing a bank. She launches into her speech, waving that clipboard like a sword. Are you authorized to enter HOA property? Ma'am, I inherited this place from my grandfather, I say, and she just about faints, gasps like I told her I'm an alien. This property belongs to the HOA, she declares, and honestly, I start wondering if I'd somehow missed the part where my hometown got annexed by a homeowner's regime while I was gone. Then, out of nowhere, she rips up my inheritance papers, tears them in half, and throws them at my face. And if you think it can't get weirder, she's on the phone with 911 within seconds, reporting me as some trespassing mastermind with fake documents. By now, the neighbors are watching from behind curtains, Mrs. Clark recording from her porch like she's Spielberg, and Mr. Morgan live texting updates to what's probably the best group chat in the state. Sheriff Davis shows up, looking like he's seen it all before, and probably has. He reads the room, listens to Pamela, the clipboard warrior, do her victim routine, and sighs. Ma'am, this is a civil dispute, he says, but she's already roping off my yard with actual red tape. Not metaphorically, literal red tape, like she's marking a crime scene. The sheriff finally checks the dates. My grandfather's deed from '87, her HOA incorporation from 2018. Silence, so thick you could hear a squirrel blush. But does that stop her? Oh no. 5 minutes after the sheriff leaves, she's taping fake violation notices to my door, posting on neighborhood apps, and calling the non-emergency line to report active noncompliance. That's when I realized this wasn't about parking, or even the property. This was about power, or at least the illusion of it. And Pamela, well, she'd been running the greatest suburban show on earth. The next day, I walk out for the paper and find my childhood fence painted construction cone orange, with violation stenciled every few feet. The neighbor's cameras catch her at 2:47 a.m., spray can in hand, signature Nike shoes leaving prints. In my flower bed, when I try to pressure wash it off, I accidentally splatter her BMW. Now she's screaming vandalism, revenge, the whole 9 yards, and we end up in a full-blown hose war on the lawn at 9 in the morning. 2 grown adults, 1 garden hose, and a crowd of neighbors watching like it's pay-per-view. I set up motion sensor sprinklers, because at this point, why not? Pamela steps onto my property, gets drenched. She calls the cops again, accusing me of assault with a water weapon. Meanwhile, I'm collecting evidence. Paint cans, shoe prints, fake forms with bogus P.O. boxes, the works. And then, a twist. Eleanor, the quietest lady on the street, starts acting weird, peeking through curtains, counting on her fingers, and ducking whenever Pamela's around. Something's off. Fast forward to Thursday, I wake up to a chainsaw. Someone, wonder who, has chopped up the fence I just cleaned, scattered boards everywhere, and set up a folding table at the entrance for compliance slips. The table snaps. Pamela tumbles backward into Mrs. Clark's tulips, and for once, everyone's laughing at her instead of hiding. But in the middle of the paperwork, hurricane, I spot something chilling. A neighbor list with red notes next to the names, my name at the top, circled more times than I can count. Things get serious when I demand real HOA incorporation documents. She finally hands over a folder. Dates don't match, filings are made up, and for 31 years, nobody was actually in charge except the woman who declared herself president. The fake assessment guy she sends to measure my property turns out to be her cousin from Arizona, not an assessor at all. Tommy, my own son, is suddenly in the middle of things, helping Pamela with community research. Turns out he's being paid to keep tabs on me. Now that stings. Then Eleanor, brave out of nowhere, comes to my door with a notebook full of financial records, missing money, bogus projects, canceled repairs, checks made out to a P.O. box that's really Pamela's. She's been threatening Eleanor with eviction, telling her if she doesn't help with compliance, she'll lose her senior housing. Eleanor's notes match up with the hospital bills for Pamela's husband. Turns out, the HOA fees? They were funding personal medical debts disguised as community improvements. That's when it clicks. This is fraud on a whole new level. With neighbors now fully awake, we form a committee. Mr. Morgan checks licensing, Mrs. Clark documents everything, and the evidence piles up. Fake elections, backdated paperwork, embezzlement, intimidation. Tommy, guilt-ridden, hands over his phone, text logs, voice memos, everything. Even recordings of Pamela coaching her cousin on how to sound like a professional. This wasn't her first scam. References to Phoenix, Denver, other neighborhoods. It's national. Federal investigators show up, and suddenly Pamela's shouting about diplomatic immunity while being loaded into a squad car. Her house, her BMW, everything seized for restitution. Eleanor's records, Tommy's files, even the ring cam footage become part of a multi-state case, blowing the lid off a scam that's hit communities from Colorado to Arizona. The irony? She built her own patio and driveway onto my land, using fake permits for community gardens, pocketing tax breaks and stolen fees while threatening everyone else. Months later, everything's changed. The red tape is gone, replaced with flower beds and honest-to-God neighborly cooperation. Mrs. Clark, now our volunteer coordinator, helps organize block parties. Eleanor leads senior safety workshops. Tommy, he and I, we're building the new fence together, finally talking like a family. Again, the neighborhood's property values are up, and for the first time in years, folks are smiling at each other without checking over their shoulders. But here's the real lesson. If you've ever felt powerless in your own community, remember this. Sometimes the people who yell the loudest about authority are just hiding how fake it really is. All it takes is one person, or a few stubborn neighbors with a talent for documenting everything, to pull back the curtain and remind everyone what real justice looks like. So, let me ask you, would you have stood up? Or kept your head down? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Was I right to fight? Or should I have let sleeping dogs lie? And if you've ever dealt with a power-tripping neighbor, I want to hear your story. Smash that like, subscribe for more tales from the wild side of suburbia, and remember, real community doesn't need a fake president to hold it together. You ever think once the bad guy's out of the picture, things just go back to normal? Yeah, me too. But let me tell you, in this neighborhood, normal is a moving target. The week after Pamela, Margaret, whatever her real name is, got taken away by the feds, it felt like we'd finally woken up from a nightmare. But the truth is, you don't just sweep up 7 years of lies, intimidation, and fraud with one dramatic arrest. There's a mess left behind. And trust me, it's not just the kind you clean with a leaf blower and a fresh coat of paint. First off, the financial fallout hit fast and hard. Suddenly, everyone's talking restitution, county audits, IRS forms, and proportional refund distributions. Mrs. Clark's got a spreadsheet the size of a CVS receipt, color-coded for every neighbor. She's in her glory, finally able to put her Excel addiction to good use. Meanwhile, the rest of us are just trying to make sense of what we're owed and what we lost, realizing the money that disappeared wasn't just numbers. It was backyard repairs, missed holidays, groceries, medicine, little things you don't even notice until they're gone. You'd think there'd be celebration. But honestly, the vibe was more like exhaustion, like a storm had blown through and left everything a little off-kilter. Some neighbors, especially the older folks, still locked their doors at noon and peeked through the curtains whenever a car slowed down. And who could blame them? Turns out, fear doesn't disappear just because the villain gets carted off in handcuffs. Eleanor, bless her, was the first one to step out, walking slow but standing tall, telling folks, no more hiding, not in this neighborhood. If you ask me, that woman has more guts than anyone else on the block. Then came the lawyers, county ones, federal ones, even a TV lawyer with teeth so white they practically glowed at sunset. All of them poking around for statements, evidence, sometimes just a soundbite. Tommy, my son, the prodigal informant, ended up being the star witness for the prosecution. I'll admit, having him home again, even after everything, was a weird comfort. The first few days, we barely spoke, just sort of danced around each other, fixing the fence, checking the mail, sharing coffee in awkward silence. But then one night, he slid a folder across the kitchen table, said, "Dad, here's everything I've got. You do what you think is right." And just like that, it felt like we might actually find a way back. Mrs. Clark's new role as unofficial neighborhood accountability czar was a blessing and a curse. She organized these weekly block meetings. No more compliance slips, just real talk under the string lights in her backyard. We passed around lemonade, took turns venting, sometimes just sat together quietly while the sun went down and the cicadas did their thing. It sounds corny, but those evenings meant something. For the first time, nobody was looking over their shoulder or worrying what Margaret, still have to remind myself, might think. We were just neighbors again. People, not pawns. Still, the damage ran deeper then. Money or fences. You could see it every time Eleanor flinched at a knock on her door, or when Mr. Morgan hesitated before speaking up about potholes like he was afraid of being called out. Even the kids played different, like the whole block was still holding its breath. Sometimes I caught myself doing it too, second-guessing every decision, wondering if trusting anyone ever again was worth the risk. It took about a month for things to really shift. The county administrator, a woman named Patrice with the world's driest sense of humor, showed up to help sort out the HOA dissolution. She brought a stack of paperwork and a calm that made you feel like maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. You're not the first neighborhood to deal with a scam, she told us at the first community meeting. But you might be the first to actually fight back as a team. That stuck with me. We went down the checklist, one painful step at a time, verifying property lines, correcting tax records, returning overpaid fees where possible. Turns out, Margaret had fudged more than financials. She'd literally built her patio, garden shed, and driveway onto my land. The county flagged every inch, and for a while, it was tense. Her relatives sent a couple of lawyers to plead honest mistake, but the records told a different story. That's when the neighbors circled the wagons. I'll never forget Mrs. Clark telling one of those lawyers, "You're welcome to call the sheriff again. We have him on speed dial now." The look on his face, priceless. One of the wildest twists came from Tommy, of all people. While helping Mrs. Clark digitize old paperwork, he stumbled on a stack of postcards, handwritten notes from Margaret to a woman in Phoenix, talking about testing strategies and successful campaigns. Turns out, our president wasn't just a con artist. She was running a playbook she'd used all over the Southwest. The Fed swooped back in, asked for everything, and a couple weeks later, we found out our case was connected to fraud in 3 other states. Our little block was suddenly the heart of a multi-state investigation. Who would have thought? Once the restitution checks started trickling in, real, actual money, delivered by registered mail, people's spirits finally started to lift. It wasn't a fortune, but it meant new fences, repaired roofs, an actual playground for the grandkids. Folks started pitching in on projects just because they wanted to, not because of some compliance notice. For the first time, it felt like we were all pulling in the same direction, not just surviving the next threat. As summer rolled in, we held the first real neighborhood cookout in years. Everyone brought something. Mrs. Clark's famous potato salad, Mr. Morgan's ribs, Tommy's surprisingly decent smoked chicken. Even Eleanor showed up, carrying a homemade pie, and sat at the head of the table like she'd always belonged there. As dusk settled, someone brought out a guitar, and, no joke, for the first time in a decade, you could hear laughter echoing down Maple Street instead of whispered complaints. But maybe the biggest change was inside. For me, and for Tommy. Fixing the fence together, we talked about mistakes, trust, what makes someone family. He apologized for the 100th time, and I told him the same thing I told myself. Everybody gets lost sometimes, son. What matters is whether you fight your way back. By the end of summer, the scars were still there, but they didn't hurt so much. They just reminded us what we'd been through, and what we'd survived. Every now and then, I catch a news report about HOA fraud somewhere else, some new con artist, running the same old play. And I think about how close we came to letting fear run our lives. If Eleanor hadn't documented everything, if Mrs. Clark hadn't stood up, if Tommy hadn't come clean, who knows where we'd be? Maybe still sneaking around our own yards, wondering if we'd get another fake violation notice or another threat in the mail. Now, we're a neighborhood that knows how to fight back. And I'll be honest, sometimes I miss the adrenaline, the drama, even Pamela's unhinged clipboard waves. But I wouldn't trade this peace for anything. If you're listening to this and thinking, that could never happen on my street, well, maybe not. Or maybe you just haven't had your Tuesday morning yet. So tell me, what would you have done? Do you trust your neighbors? Would you stand up or keep your head down? Drop your thoughts below. And if you ever find yourself staring down a clipboard-wielding president with fake authority, remember, sometimes the real power is just neighbors looking out for each other. Smash that like if you're team neighborhood and share your own wild story. Who knows, maybe your block is one good cookout away from a Ray. I'll come back too.